I opened the door, expecting my grocery delivery. Instead, I found a woman in a gray suit holding a leather folder. "Nathan Cooper?" she asked. "You've been served." She handed me the documents and walked away before I could respond. My hands shook as I read the header. Emergency Custody Petition. Respondent: Nathan Cooper. The petitioner's name made my blood run cold. Jessica Morgan. My former daughter-in-law. The woman who'd abandoned her twin sons with me 5 years ago and vanished without a trace. The twins, Marcus and James, were in the backyard. I could hear them laughing as they kicked a soccer ball around. They were 8 now. Happy, healthy, thriving boys who called me grandpa, but treated me like their father because, frankly, I was the only parent they'd ever really known. I sat down at the kitchen table, my reading glasses slipping down my nose as I scanned the legal jargon. Jessica was claiming I'd unlawfully retained custody of her children. She wanted them back immediately. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Let me back up. 5 years ago, my son Michael died in a construction accident. He was only 32. The grief nearly destroyed me, but I had to stay strong because he'd left behind twin boys just 3 years old and a widow who was, to put it mildly, unprepared for single motherhood. Jessica had always been flighty. That's the kindest word I can use. She and Michael had a turbulent marriage. He loved her desperately, but she resented the responsibility of motherhood. After his funeral, she spiraled. 2 months after we buried my son, Jessica showed up at my door in Winnipeg with the twins in tow. It was late March, still bitterly cold, and the boys were wearing thin jackets. "Nathan, I need help," she'd said, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Just for a week, maybe 2. I need to get my head straight." What was I supposed to say? These were my grandsons, my son's legacy. "Of course," I told her. "Take the time you need." She kissed the boys on their foreheads, a gesture that seemed more performative than genuine, and left. That was the last time Marcus and James saw their mother. For the first few days, she texted occasionally. Brief messages. "How are they? Tell them I love them." Then the messages stopped. I called. No answer. I texted. The messages turned green. She'd blocked me. I drove to her apartment in Brandon. The landlord said she'd broken her lease and left no forwarding address. I contacted her parents in Ontario. They hadn't heard from her either, and seemed unsurprised. "That's Jessica," her mother said with weary resignation. "She does this." So I did what any grandfather would do. I became a father again at 63 years old. Those first months were brutal. I was grieving my son while learning to navigate the needs of 2 traumatized 3-year-olds. Potty training. Nightmares. Explaining over and over why mommy wasn't coming back yet, though I had no idea if that was true. But we found our rhythm. I enrolled them in preschool. I learned to cook meals they'd actually eat. Grilled cheese became my specialty. I read them bedtime stories every night. The same worn copy of Goodnight Moon that I'd once read to Michael. When they started kindergarten, I was the one who walked them to the bus stop on the first day, camera in hand, documenting the milestone. I was the one who volunteered for field trips, who made it to every school concert, who helped with homework at the kitchen table. The boys never asked about Jessica anymore. Somewhere around their 6th birthday, they stopped mentioning her entirely. I became just grandpa, but I knew they saw me as more than that. Last year, Marcus told his 2nd grade teacher that his dad was picking him up. She'd looked confused. The records listed me as grandfather, but I didn't correct him. What was the point? 3 months ago, something changed. The twins turned 8 in September. Under the terms of Michael's will, they each received a trust fund that would become accessible at 18, but the fund itself was substantial. My son had been smart with money, and his life insurance payout, combined with some savvy investments I'd made on the boys' behalf, meant each twin had approximately $150, 000, waiting for them. The trust documents were public record. Anyone could access them through the probate court. Apparently, Jessica had, because exactly 2 weeks after the boy's 8th birthday, after 5 years of absolute silence, she sent me an email. The subject line was, "We need to talk about my sons." Her sons, after abandoning them for 5 years. The email was carefully worded, probably written by a lawyer. She claimed she'd been working on herself, attending therapy, building a stable life. She wanted to reconnect with Marcus and James. She suggested supervised visits, perhaps working toward joint custody. I didn't respond. 3 days later, she showed up at the elementary school during pickup. The principal called me immediately. Jessica had tried to take the boys, claiming she was their mother. The school had her listed as non-custodial. I'd made sure of that years ago, just in case, and they'd refused to release the children to her. By the time I arrived, she was gone. But she'd left a note with the secretary. "Tell Nathan I'll see him in court." And now, here we were. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks away. I immediately contacted David Thornton, a family lawyer I'd worked with years ago when setting up custody arrangements. He'd helped me secure temporary guardianship when Jessica first disappeared, contingent on her returning within a reasonable time frame. The problem, David explained when we met at his office in downtown Winnipeg, is that she's their biological mother. Courts in Canada heavily favor reunification with biological parents, even when those parents have been absent. For 5 years, I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. Unfortunately, unless we can prove she's unfit or that reunification would harm the children, she has a strong case. He paused, studying me over his reading glasses. "Nathan, I need to ask, do you have any documentation? Anything showing her abandonment was voluntary? Text messages, emails, witnesses?" I thought about those first few weeks. The ignored calls, the blocked number. I have the old text messages, but they're vague. She never explicitly said she was leaving permanently. What about since then? Any contact? Nothing until 2 weeks ago. David leaned back in his chair. That's 5 years of complete abandonment. That helps, but we need more. Social media, financial records, anything that shows she was capable of contact, but chose not to make it. I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I searched for Jessica online. Her Facebook profile under her maiden name, Jessica Hartley, was public, and it was a goldmine. Photos from the past 5 years showed her living what could only be described as a carefree, childless life. There she was in Vancouver, hiking the grouse grind. In Toronto, attending concerts. In Mexico, cocktail in hand on a beach. The dates on the photos corresponded with times I was dealing with Marcus's asthma attacks or James's anxiety over starting school. One photo, dated from 2 years ago, showed her at a party with the caption, "Living my best life. No regrets." No regrets, while I was making lunches and helping with fractions. But the most damning piece came from a comment thread on a post from 3 years ago. A friend had asked, "How are the kids?" Jessica's response, "I needed a fresh start. Sometimes you have to choose yourself." I screenshotted everything and sent it to David. "This is good," he said when I met with him again. "Really good. She's been publicly documenting her abandonment. But Nathan, I need to prepare you. She'll have a story. Probably about mental health struggles, about needing time to heal. The court will be sympathetic to that narrative. What about what's best for the boys? We'll argue that too. But you need to understand reunification is the default position. We're fighting uphill." The preliminary hearing arrived too quickly. The courthouse in Winnipeg was cold and institutional. Jessica sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Mills, who looked expensive. Jessica had cleaned up conservative dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked like someone's respectable mother, not the woman who'd abandoned her children. She didn't look at me once. The judge, Justice Ellen Morrison, was a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mills, your client is petitioning for custody of her biological children after a prolonged absence. What's your argument?" Catherine stood. "Your Honor, my client suffered severe postpartum depression following the death of her husband. She made the difficult but responsible decision to place her children temporarily with their grandfather while she sought treatment. She's now stable, employed, and ready to resume her parental responsibilities. Postpartum depression. The twins were 3 when she left them. But I understood the strategy medicalize the abandonment, make it sound like a health decision rather than a choice." Thornton. Justice Morrison looked at David. "Your Honor, while we're sympathetic to any mental health struggles, Ms. Morgan may have experienced, the facts don't support a temporary placement. She had 0 contact with her children for 5 years. She blocked Mr. Fime, Cooper's phone number. She moved without leaving a forwarding address. She made no child support payments. She attended no medical appointments, no school functions, no birthdays. This wasn't a health crisis, it was abandonment. And notably, her renewed interest coincides precisely with the boys' trust funds becoming public record." Jessica's lawyer shot to her feet. "That's a baseless accusation." "Is it?" David opened his folder. Morgan sent her first communication in 5 years, exactly 14 days after the trust fund documents were filed with the probate court. The timing is rather remarkable. Justice Morrison held up her hand. We're not here to litigate motives today. This is a preliminary hearing. Cooper, you've had de facto custody for 5 years. What's the current custody arrangement? David answered, informal guardianship. Your Honor, Cooper has been the sole caregiver, but there's no formal custody order because Ms. Morgan couldn't be located to serve papers. And the children, how old are they now? 8 years old. Your Honor, twins, old enough to express a preference. Justice Morrison made a note. I'm ordering a custody evaluation. I want a social worker to interview both parties and, more importantly, the children. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for a full hearing. She looked directly at Jessica. Morgan, you're granted supervised visitation 2 hours, twice weekly, supervised by a neutral third party. Cooper will continue as primary caregiver pending the evaluation. Jessica's face fell. This wasn't the immediate custody she'd expected. As we left the courthouse, David pulled me aside. 6 weeks. That's our timeline. The custody evaluation will be crucial. The social worker will want to see your home, interview the boys, assess their attachment to you versus their mother. They don't even remember her. That might work in our favor. But Nathan, he hesitated. Catherine Mills doesn't come cheap. Jessica has hired a top-tier lawyer. She's serious about this, which means she either genuinely wants the boys back, or she wants access to their money. Possibly both. The next 6 weeks were the longest of my life. The supervised visits were awkward and painful. I dropped Marcus and James at a neutral location, a family services office in St. Boniface, and wait in my truck for 2 hours while they spent time with the stranger who was their mother. The first visit, Marcus cried. Why do we have to go? Grandpa, it's just for a little while. She's your mom, but we don't know her. James, always the more pragmatic twin, took his brother's hand. It'll be okay. I watched them walk inside, my heart breaking. When I picked them up 2 hours later, they were quiet. The supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, took me aside. They were polite but distant, she said quietly. Jessica tried. She brought gifts, asked about school. But there's no bond there. It was like watching strangers make small talk. The visits continued. Jessica brought more gifts, expensive toys the boys didn't need. She took them for ice cream during the summer sessions, tried to ask about their friends, their interests. But I could see the strain. She didn't know Marcus was allergic to strawberries. She didn't know James liked to read before bed. She didn't know their teacher's name or that Marcus was struggling with long division. She didn't know them. Meanwhile, the custody evaluator, a clinical social worker named Dr. Sarah Chen, came to my home in River Heights. She interviewed me first, asking about my daily routine with the boys, my health, my support system. I showed her their bedroom, neat but lived in, decorated with their school artwork and hockey posters. I walked her through our scheduled school, homework, dinner together every night, weekend activities. Tell me about their emotional state, Chen asked. They're good kids, happy. Marcus is more sensitive, needs reassurance. James is the protector. They're incredibly close to each other. I paused. They've asked me a few times why they have to see Jessica. I don't know what to tell them. What do you tell them? The truth, that she's their mother, and the court wants them to get to know her. And what did they say? James said. You're our dad. Marcus agreed. Chen made notes, her expression neutral. Then she interviewed the boys. I waited in the kitchen, trying not to eavesdrop but unable to help myself. Do you like living with your grandfather? Chen asked. Marcus's voice was bright. Grandpa makes the best pancakes, and he helps us with our science projects. What about your mother? Do you enjoy visiting her? A pause. Then James, she's nice, but we don't really know her. Would you like to know her better? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't know, Marcus said quietly. It feels weird. What feels weird? She wants us to call her Mom, but Grandpa's the one who takes care of us. He's the one who's always been there. My throat tightened. The evaluation took 3 weeks. Chen interviewed teachers, the pediatrician, neighbors. She even spoke to the twins' soccer coach, who apparently told her I hadn't missed a single game in 3 years. Finally, her report was submitted to the court. David called me the day before the hearing. Nathan, I've read Dr. Chen's evaluation. It's very favorable to us. What does it say? She's recommending you retain primary custody. She notes that the boys have a secure, stable attachment to you and virtually no attachment to Jessica. She observed that Jessica, while well-intentioned, lacks knowledge of the children's daily needs and routines. Most importantly, both boys expressed a clear preference to remain with you. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. So we'll win. I can't promise anything, but this gives us a strong position. The hearing was held on a gray November morning. The courthouse was busier this time, filled with other families fighting their own battles. Jessica sat with her lawyer, looking more strained than last time. The confidence was gone. Justice Morrison called the court to order. I've reviewed Dr. Chen's custody evaluation and all submitted materials. Mills, does your client wish to make a statement? Catherine whispered to Jessica, who nodded and stood. Your Honor, I made mistakes. I know that. After my husband died, I fell apart. I wasn't in a place to be the mother my sons needed, but I've worked hard to get better. I've been in therapy. I'm stable now, and I want my children back. They're my sons. I gave birth to them. I deserve a chance to be their mother. It was a good speech. Emotional, without being theatrical. Justice Morrison turned to me. Cooper, do you have a statement? I stood, my knees shaking. Public speaking had never been my strength. Your Honor, I don't doubt that Jessica struggled after Michael's death. We all did. But she didn't just struggle, she disappeared. For 5 years, she didn't call on the boys' birthdays. She didn't send Christmas cards. She didn't pay $1 in support. I've been the one who sat up with Marcus when he had nightmares. I'm the one who taught James to ride a bike. I'm the one who's been there for every skinned knee, every school play, every moment of their lives. My voice cracked. I'm 68 years old. I should be retired, playing golf, taking it easy. Instead, I'm packing school lunches and coaching soccer. And I wouldn't trade it for anything because those boys are my life. They're all I have left of my son. And more than that, they're my boys now. Not because of biology, but because I've earned it every single day for 5 years. The courtroom was silent. Justice Morrison looked at her notes. I've reviewed the evidence carefully. Chen's evaluation is thorough and concerning. She notes that while Ms. Morgan has made efforts during supervised visitation, there is no meaningful bond between her and the children. More significantly, both children expressed anxiety about the possibility of living with their mother, and a clear, strong preference to remain with Mr. Cooper. Jessica's face went pale. The court recognizes that Miss Morgan has biological rights as the children's mother. However, those rights are not absolute. After 5 years of complete abandonment, and I use that word intentionally, as Miss Morgan's own social media posts indicate, this was a choice, not merely a health crisis. Her parental rights have been effectively forfeited through her actions. Catherine stood. Your Honor, we'd like to submit additional evidence regarding my client's mental health. Mills, I've read your submissions. I'm not unsympathetic to mental health struggles, but mental illness does not absolve someone of responsibility indefinitely. Morgan had 5 years to seek help, to reach out, to make even minimal effort. She chose not to. And notably, her renewed interest coincides with the children's trust funds becoming accessible. Your Honor, that's speculation. Justice Morrison held up her hand. It's an observation, Mills, one that this court cannot ignore. She turned back to her notes. Therefore, the court orders the following. Primary physical and legal custody of Marcus Cooper and James Cooper is awarded to Nathan Cooper. Morgan is granted visitation rights supervised initially, with the possibility of unsupervised visits pending demonstrated consistent involvement and therapeutic progress for both her and the children. Morgan is ordered to pay child support retroactively for the past 5 years, calculated at standard guidelines. The gavel came down. Jessica's face crumpled. She stood, looking at me for the first time since this began. Nathan, but I was already leaving. Outside the courthouse, David shook my hand. Congratulations. This was the best possible outcome. It shouldn't have come to this. But you did right by those boys. That's what mattered. I drove home in a daze. When I walked through the door, Marcus and James were at the kitchen table doing homework with Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd been watching them. Grandpa. They jumped up and ran to me. I hugged them tightly, breathing in the scent of their shampoo. James looked up at me, his eyes worried. What happened? I knelt down to their level. You're staying with me? For good? Marcus threw his arms around my neck. I knew it. I told James we would. James was quieter, but I saw the relief in his face. Forever. Forever. That night, after dinner spaghetti, their favorite, I tucked them into bed. Marcus fell asleep immediately, exhausted from the emotion of the day. James stayed awake a bit longer. Grandpa, buddy, is our mom sad? The question caught me off guard. Probably. Do you think she really wanted us? How do you answer that? I think she wanted to want you. But wanting something and being ready for it are different things. He considered this. I'm glad we're staying with you. Me too. Can I ask you something else? Always. Can we just call you Dad? I know you're our grandpa, but you're more like our dad anyway. My eyes burned. If that's what you want. Absolutely. Good night. Good night. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them sleep. Two boys who'd lost so much but somehow found stability and love in this old house, with their aging grandfather who'd stepped up when no one else would. 3 months later, I received one more piece of paper in the mail. A check from Jessica for the retroactive child support. The court had calculated 5 years at $800 per month per child, nearly $100. 000 total. Attached was a handwritten note. Nathan, I won't apologize, because words don't mean anything at this point. You were right about everything. I wasn't ready to be a mother. Maybe I never will be. But I'm glad they had you. You gave them the life I couldn't. Tell them I'm sorry. When they're older, if they ever want to know. Jessica. I deposited the check into the boys' trust funds. They'd need it for university someday. The note, I put in a box in the attic with other documents from that period. Maybe someday Marcus and James would want to read it. Maybe not. For now, we had our life. Soccer practice on Thursdays, homework struggles, family dinners, weekend movies. The ordinary, beautiful routine of raising children who knew they were loved. And that, in the end, was justice enough.